Welcome to the podcast. We talk about all the things that are hidden in the shadows. This is Isaac, and on this bonus episode, I am joined by Dylan from Paranormal Thoughts Podcast. What's going on, dude?
Hey Isaac, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to. I always love to get to speak to other people in the paranormal kind of realm, and especially like-minded podcasters too. It's always a good time.
Yeah, no, it's before I got into the podcast game, and when I was listening to podcasts to begin with, I was very picky about paranormal podcasts in particularly because I always felt like people were putting on a show. It's like they had a character, they had a voice tone, they like telling you a story like this and having your next thing, and they had a lot of like special effects and things going on in the background, and it kind of distracted from the story itself. That's kind of the reason why I started doing podcasts in the first place. Well, at the time, it was like 2019 and 2020. So paranormal podcasts have changed, and a lot of new ones have come out of COVID, like majority of podcasts have, because really no one had anything else to do. When I listened to yours, you had a genuine interviewer kind of, I don't know the right way to put it. You were extremely intrigued by the guests that you bring on and the subject you talk about. You're trying less to put on a show and trying to get more information is what I liked when I listened to yours. Especially episode with, I forget their names, but they were considered like the modern day Ed and Lorraine Warren, the detective, and his wife.
Yeah, I just did a second episode with Chris and Harmony DeFlorio, are their names. They're based at New York. So yeah, like that's sort of the whole, like, doing Paranormal Thoughts is almost like a selfish. I do it kind of selfishly because it's I get to talk to people who I've always wanted to be able to speak to, or do research into topics that really interest me. So it's always kind of been what I would like to hear if I was going to pull up an episode, but also being sort of diverse enough that I probably do lean on particular topics a fair bit, but also then like to go out of my sort of comfort zone and look into things that people suggest, and it's a really big learning kind of thing. Like, I get to learn a lot and share information, and hopefully people can do that same sort of thing. It's really just a big collective, really.
And what started you in the podcast game altogether?
So it's always a funny one, this. So like my background is like a musician, audio production. So I'm like an audio producer for radio. That's like my full-time gig. And back in 2016, it was, I wasn't even sure I wanted to do a podcast per se. I just had a bunch of thoughts on the paranormal, and I thought, I'm just going to record almost like an audio journal kind of thing. I don't know. I don't really know what I was thinking at the time, but I literally recorded myself speaking maybe 20, 30 minutes or so about some of the things that were going through my mind at that time. Like that year was a big, like, I'd finished university, trying to find like full-time work, trying to figure out, I guess, who I sort of was. I was only like 20 or so. It was a sort of a really strange time in my life. And then all the paranormal kind of stuff was coming to a head a little bit for me. So literally just recorded this 20-minute, 30-minute recording of just me speaking. And then I didn't really think much about it. I mean, I just kind of put it online and titled it Paranormal Thoughts Podcast, because that's literally what it was. It was my paranormal thoughts. And then I was like, well, I guess I'm doing a podcast now. And then it's kind of just, it's gone to places I would have never have expected since then. It's been a really interesting journey and very fulfilling. So even if it was to stop tomorrow, I mean, I've gotten so much from it that I could have never have imagined all those years ago.
So why particularly the paranormal?
It's been an interest for me for as long as I can remember. I don't really know where it came from. I think it was just something that I always enjoyed, frightening sort of stories. And I remember getting into the sort of UFO alien abduction phenomena like really young, like too young, really. And I've just never really been able to shake it. And I feel like I was always kind of maybe the weird kid at like school where, people are like, oh, you don't actually believe in that stuff, do you? I'm like, oh, well yeah, dude. But never really went into too much detail about it unless someone showed interest. And it's just one of those things. It's like I have a few things like that in life which I've never really been able to shake. And it's kind of cool now to do the podcast because you find your audience, you find that niche and there's people who are far more obsessed with it than I am. So it's like you really find your people, and it's pretty amazing. But yeah, why the paranormal? I don't really know. I feel like it is something that is sort of subconsciously maybe drawing me towards it. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like sometimes you go through stages with it where you're really invested and then you kind of need to like step away a bit. But at the end of the day, I feel like it is always kind of drawing me back, and I'm sort of meant to be doing something within it. It is a bit of like I don't know. It's hard to explain, but you probably feel the same where even if you wanted to get out, it still kind of brings you back in. But I feel like it's for a reason.
Well, I can't get out for the simple reason of being is that everything I've experienced and my entire life, because I've lived with the paranormal since I was a kid, and including my wife. She's psychic, so she's been with the paranormal since she was a child her entire life. So it's nothing we could ever escape. And the things that we've experienced in the last couple of years, there's no refusing that this exists or not. We know it does, and there's no putting back on the blindfold. Essentially, like we have been exposed to everything out there, and so much so that it be basically lying to ourselves to the highest degree to convince ourselves otherwise. Is kind of why we are in basically doing what we do when it comes to our paranormal podcast, essentially because just nothing really else our lives are lived with at the time. I won't say we're obsessed. It's just it is a natural point of life for us now. But I usually want to ask people about the paranormal, why they chose it, because maybe they've had an experience. Have you ever had something paranormal experience happen to you?
Yeah, I've had a fair few different things, and things which are maybe more maybe easy to explain as well. But I guess it all kind of starts with being young, and I guess living in a house that had activity at certain times. It wasn't an old house by any means, but we did have a stint there for a few years where a lot of relatives were passing. And I feel like after their passing, there'd be this heightened sense of activity for weeks or months, and then it would kind of just fizzle away from things being moved to hearing footsteps upstairs while we were all downstairs. And that was sort of the original kind of progression, very normal kind of, not normal, but very typical kind of hauntings in a house, I guess you could say. And then I guess as I got older, I started to actually look for these experiences. So, going on investigations and just trying to seek out more, because, once you kind of get a glimpse, you really want to be able to or find some sort of evidence just to kind of convince yourself. And then once you do, as you just kind of said, it's like the blindfold, you can't really put it back on. I always find that hard to understand, that people can just choose to ignore a lot of this activity, especially if they've experienced it, because I don't know, I feel like it's pretty life changing in a sense, and it really puts in perspective, like what's our sort of purpose. And it just goes to show there's far more that it goes on that just can't be easily explained. And for me, that's exciting. That I want to try to find answers, or just to sort of better understand. But yeah, from those sort of initial experiences, I've since, I even did a podcast where we went and did a paranormal investigation with a paranormal investigating team. And even in that, we got some interesting audio captured where, unfortunately, it doesn't always come through as well, through an audio recorder in comparison to being in the room. But we did capture a few bits and pieces. The weirdest thing, I think, I came away from that investigation. We did that investigation was in South Australia at a railroad museum. And the weirdest thing that happened, I've had this particular audio recorder for many years. It was used for a bunch of like short films and other sort of podcast bits and pieces, pretty reliable as you would want it to be. And when I went to edit that episode, the recorder had this weird glitch where the audio was kind of out. It was losing sync with itself and kind of skipping around. And I've never had that happen before or after. And even when I went to look it up, I couldn't find any explanation. But it wasn't something I'd noticed until after the fact. But it was just one of those really weird pieces where obviously I feel like something was maybe manipulating that equipment for whatever reason. But that was something where that was great proof to me, because I'm like, this is actually corrupted, the SD card somehow. But yeah, strange things like that. Heard had a lot of audio type experiences, I suppose, with the paranormal. But I still haven't really seen any figures or anything like that, apparitions, unfortunately. But also, I haven't really put myself into a lot of those situations of late. I've sort of been more kind of sitting back, being the sort of researcher kind of thing. But yeah, then even I had a really strange experience not long after starting the podcast where I was getting a lot of synchronicities, and I kind of took those on board as focusing my time into the podcast. I felt like it was a bit of a message, you could say, that was really trying to tell me I was supposed to be working on this podcast. And those synchronicities came from owls and my interest and curiosity to whether I've had any alien abduction type experiences.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty weird, and like I can go into that if you like, but it was
Yes.
yeah, well, literally I'd started the podcast, and as I said, that 2016 was just a really interesting year, and I had recently come across Mike Cleland, and he is a researcher. He's an abductee who has looked into synchronicity within alien abduction and also how owls play into that. And I don't know what it was, but as soon as I came across his work, it really like a little bit of a fire under me. And I was just like, this is so fascinating. And I couldn't really tell why it really spoke to me, but did a bunch of looking into him, kind of started my podcast. And then one evening I was driving home. It was I think it was like very early in the morning, and I was driving home. I had put a podcast on, and at this time, my car didn't have, like a aux cord or anything. I was literally burning podcasts onto blank CDs, but I wasn't, like titling the CD because, I'd usually kind of do it just before I had to leave. So I was like, I got, like a 30-minute drive home. I've just like kind of reached onto the ground and picked up a CD, put it in. And it was a podcast I previously listened to with Rob and Trish McGregor interviewing Mike Cleland, this researcher. And I was like, I remember this episode. I haven't heard this for a while. Kind of just got lost on the floor of my car. But I'm like, this will be entertaining. So they're talking about the concept of synchronicity showing itself through a lot of alien abduction cases. So I'm listening to that thinking, well, this is really interesting, because this is kind of where all this kind of started for me, kind of starting the podcast, and, it was all just that kind of weird time. And then I started thinking back to whether or not I've had an experience. And, I can say I don't think I have necessarily, but if I have had, I don't have any memory of it. But that could also play into the hand of this kind of stuff as well, because that's a typical thing, people not having a memory. But when you're sort of drawn to something so much, I feel like maybe there could be something a bit more at play there. So I'm listening to this podcast about synchronicity, aliens, and Mike Cleland being the guy who has done research into the whole owl phenomena, people seeing owls, physical and also, maybe in a lot of different ways, all surrounding their alien abduction cases. Typically, a lot of people might see like a 4-foot owl before seeing a UFO, and they go, hang on, owls aren't 4 feet tall. So there's this theory that it's a screen memory, right? That these beings are disguising themselves as these owls, or, owls are kind of the gateway from this universe into another with their large eyes. There's a lot of different theories, but owls kind of go through, date back hundreds of years throughout history. They're these really interesting symbolic birds. But yeah, listening to this podcast, thinking about my experiences, if I've ever had anything, and then literally I'm about a minute from my house and I see an owl land on a street sign, and I get out, I stop the car, I get out, and I go over to this owl, and I start talking to it, like as if it was, a person or something. It was pretty odd. But I took this weird kind of synchronicity type event me thinking about my alien abduction, sort of where I might sit with that, having listened to an interview with the guy who kind of was doing all this information, all this research rather, and then seeing an owl all within, like a half an hour kind of period was it was hard to sort of deny that the universe wasn't trying to tell me something then. Then for the next, 3 days, there was a bunch of really strange things where I saw another owl. I mean, I've lived in this area like most of my whole life. Never had seen an owl before or like after these events. Yes, I saw another owl. Also kept seeing owls just everywhere. Like, I'd go out to the grocery store and there was just a lot of owl paraphernalia kind of everywhere. I had a really vivid dream of alien abduction over that time as well. It was just this really heightened sense of, and I feel like that does happen if you do start to have these meaningful coincidences within synchronicity. You do sort of open yourself up more to it. But over that weekend, it was like I was on I was operating on another level of this stuff. And then, I don't know, I still haven't really been able to make sense of what that meant to me, but I kind of just put it back into, and also having spoken to some very interesting people and kind of what I'm getting from the universe and from speaking with people is that I should be putting my time into the paranormal, doing, paranormal thoughts and kind of giving back in some way because maybe I'm doing it a little differently to someone else, or hard to really say, but that was a really weird experience. And it was just one of those weird things where I can't really explain it. And maybe it was nothing, but I sort of chose to put it into something which hopefully was the right thing to do.
No, that's interesting stuff. I think I've heard about the owl theory before. It was kind of almost like a subplot point to the movie The Fourth Kind.
Yeah.
So that's why I remember when you talked about owls, because I remember after watching that film, I was like, what is this? And I'm looking up stuff about it. But yeah, I'm always one that pays attention to everything, and if I see patterns repeating itself over again in any kind of situations I'm paying attention to those specific patterns. So synchronicities is something I never really cared much into, but it's always something that I've looked into, but it's something that I've always paid attention to when they're happening. But no, that's some interesting stuff. I can tell you that much. But it kind of leads into another question that you kind of halfway answered, but I guess more clarification. But this gets to your own opinion. I always talk about paranormal podcasts that I've met and talked to, and I seem to kind of find two kinds of paranormal podcasts two kinds of people that would do a paranormal podcast, and those are spectators to the game of the paranormal, and there is actual players in the game. What I mean by that is there's people who observe the paranormal from a safe distance because they don't want to be involved in it whatsoever, and those who are involved in it, i.e., paranormal investigating, researching, searching into it, and basically involving themselves as much as they can into the actual research part. Like myself, I consider myself a player in the game because I'm also a paranormal investigator. But would you consider yourself a spectator or a player in the game?
I guess I could probably sit on both sides of that fence, sort of depending on, there's been times where I've probably been more of a spectator, and been times where I have been, probably more so a player. And I guess it depends on, I think it depends on a lot of factors, but mostly like Paranormal Thoughts is like one of the many kind of creative projects I do, and sometimes it is all consuming, it's like I'm doing this, researching particular topics. Can literally, sometimes I pick a topic and it feels like I'm back at university doing an assignment. Like I've literally, gone to that much work digging through the best sort of sources I could find. Because, not to, like, you're totally right. There's definitely two different sort of types of people. And every time I pick a new topic, I go through and I'll listen to a bunch of podcasts who have done that exact thing, just to see, not to necessarily even get, to like steal ideas or anything like that. It's actually to see what points they have touched upon and what they've missed. And I always try to find things that people have overlooked or maybe just haven't gotten into. Or, there's a lot out there who have just read word for word an article because, I've already read that article and I can tell that's what they're reading, So I'm always trying to be different, which takes an extremely long amount of time, going through just everything you can possibly find, and I feel like it's getting harder and harder in a sense because I don't know, there's a weird thing. I feel like with Google not actually giving you results for things and, having to get whole books or whatever you can kind of find. But there have definitely been times where, being able to go out in the field, I always try to get out whenever this sort of opportunity shows itself to, you know, try to experience and kind of, it really grounds you back in this stuff because you kind of can get a bit dissociated as well. It's very easy for me to sort of come on here and speak and then kind of, stop recording and try to, you know, put it out of my mind. But sometimes it's actually good to really just be living in it. So I don't know if that's the answer you're kind of looking for, but I could say I'm definitely on both of those sides, just depending on where I'm maybe at or yeah, I mean, I would love to be more involved, of course, but yeah, it's just one of those things, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's because you want to, and that's what makes you not a spectator. Is the fact that you want to. Nothing against other podcasts that might be listening.
Really?
Is that I've talked to many podcasts who find the paranormal entertaining, but do not, on any circumstance, want to be involved for fear of what they might experience or see.
Yeah.
They are satisfied enough with just hearing about stories and not experiencing whatsoever. So that's why I
Well,
usually ask in those situations.
no, totally. And it's an interesting, I've never really thought about it like that, but I remember some years ago, people would kind of ask me like, what's the go of like Ouija boards say? And I'm like, I don't really know. I've never used one. So I was like, I'll buy one and I'll use it and I'll do a podcast on it. And that was just one of those things where it was like, well, people have the question, there's a lot of answers out there, but if people are asking me, why don't we suss it out? I'm in that same sort of position where I want to buy like a haunted item and suss out what that's like, kind of not being like the guinea pig in a sense, but it's like if anyone is going to maybe suss out some of these things, I'd rather it kind of be me who has an understanding, a respect for the paranormal, and then being able to share that with people at a safe distance, you know what I mean? Because a lot of people who listen to my show, there's a lot of people who just enjoy, once again, find the paranormal entertaining, interesting, and then there are the sort of diehard people who are actually, into a bunch of different sort of things, researching and all sorts who go out and do all that sort of legwork. But yeah, I guess if I can put myself as in amongst it as much as possible and then share that with people who just want to be, who just want to listen to a podcast, then hopefully, I'm the kind of guy to be able to do a bit of that.
I'm sorry. That must be an Australian term because I've never heard that before. Suss out? What is that? What is
Yeah,
that?
that actually, check out, I guess you could kind of say.
Okay.
Yeah, give it a stuff. Really funny, actually. Yeah, that must be an Australianism. Never really thought about that.
Because the word sus amongst anyone here in America is usually suspicious. So when you use it in that terminology, I was like, I know he's trying to say figure out or like, plan out or something like that. But suss out, I never heard it used like that before.
That's really funny.
It just that sparked my interest. I was like, but I never heard that before.
Yeah, we have some funny ways of saying things over here. I tell you what, it must be pretty bizarre sometimes.
We're not innocent with that way of making odd terminology for a lot of things that just see simplified with a one word over here in America. Moving on. What, I guess, who better? What did I say? Ask that question. Who is you consider your most interesting guest?
Oh, I feel like this probably changes time and time again. I mean, once again, having as we just mentioned earlier, Chris and Harmony DeFlorio, the exorcists, who I've just spoken to. I think I've spoken to them twice within about 2 years, and I kind of want to do that maybe every 2 years because they're currently working in the field of going to people who are kind of at the wit's end, people who are having these very, I guess you could say, extreme hauntings, and they're literally giving up their time to go and suss out what's actually going on and to actually help these families, really. So it's actually, it's very moving, I guess, that there's people out there who they didn't choose to get into demonology. It's kind of one of those weird things where sort of you feel like you're supposed to be doing it, and they're literally giving their all their time and energy, because it's a massive thing to go and get rid of these entities out of homes, or actually off people. Obviously, if these things are attached to someone. But yeah, speaking to and like the whole demonology kind of thing, I feel like is a very interesting, very popular topic at the moment too. So anytime I get to do that, I even did like a round table discussion with a bunch of demonologists the other year, and there were 3 very different people. Like someone was like a proper kind of like Satanist practicing all the sort of dark kind of magic, and someone was a bit more of from it's very sort of different people anyway. But that stuff, I love doing that. One thing I do all the time, and this is something that other podcasts sometimes do as well, and some don't. I always kind of want to avoid speaking to experts as much as possible, unless they have like a very interesting kind of point of view. Because I feel like sometimes it can be a bit like, this researcher is putting out a new book, so they're sort of doing the whole book kind of tour, which is fair enough. They're pushing their product. That's totally fine. But for me, I was always I liked hearing from the everyday experiencer, myself being one of those people. So very early on in the piece, I started to interview everyday people who claim to have had an alien abduction experience. And that is probably, I love getting to do that, because I think it's very important for these people to get to come on in a safe environment and share their stories. Some people I've spoken to have never even spoken to anyone about this stuff. And some people have positive experiences within it, and some people have had very negative experiences as well. And I think it's important to hear both of those sides, because someone at home listening who may be feeling they're in one of those camps can hopefully get a better understanding of what might be happening to them. And, there's things now like the support groups, but once again, that's not as accessible. You go on Reddit and get in a subreddit and so on. But I feel like speaking to someone for an hour who I believe is genuinely telling the truth, what I always say is it's real to them. Maybe this isn't a physical thing that's happened to this particular person, but there must be something going on within that. And I think it's worth talking about. And even how broad that whole topic is, I had no idea until I started to speak to everyday people, because if you follow, say, some researchers' point of view on alien abduction, they've probably got not so much an agenda, but they're looking within a certain area. They're probably finding certain cases that fit whatever, that book is about, or kind of what have you. But when you kind of just speak to many different people from many different walks of life, there are these interconnecting threads, but it's really surprising to see how different everything is, from maybe what these beings look like, or how they interact, or how they operate, the types of things that people see or hear or even smell during these experiences, and even just the weird things kind of leading up and then afterwards as well. It makes it, I wish I could say I've found more of an answer to what is actually going on within the abduction phenomena, but I feel like it's probably left more questions in a sense, which I guess that's just, comes with the line of work. But that's the stuff that I'm really passionate about. And that's the sort of, when I do those episodes, people reach out and they get, people are really positive about it and are really appreciative. And at the end of the day, if that's what I can do, it's kind of be a vessel for this stuff and allow people to safely get this information from people I believe to be legit, then that's such a win for me. And I love getting to do that. So probably there's not so much maybe one guest amongst all of that, it's kind of maybe the whole collective of, and those episodes are called Interview with an Abductee. So that's probably that whole kind of subcategory of paranormal thoughts that all as a whole, that's probably my favorite stuff I get to do. And I feel like the most important stuff I can really put out there.
Yeah, that's with them. Yeah, especially good. I've done over 100 or something episodes since 2020, and one guest I always say is most interesting because no one's yet to top him, and that doesn't go against anything of my other guests that I've had on the show, but so far no one is able to top Carl Johnson, who I've had on the podcast. You know who Carl Johnson is?
All right, please fill me in.
Carl Johnson, I forgot his name of his brother, Carl. It's him and his brother. Were paranormal investigators in the early times of the 60s and stuff like that. They were the ones that found the Conjuring House and told the Warrens about it in the first place. And if it weren't for the Johnsons, the brothers, the Warrens would have never known about the Conjuring House, and they would never been so famous from it. From other cases, yes, but for the Conjuring House, no. It's Carl and his brother is the one who found it in the first place, and they told Ed and Lorraine Warren about it.
I feel like I have heard similar things. I'm not sure if it was even from them, but I feel like there's been other paranormal investigators who kind of always got in on the ground level before Ed and Lorraine kind of came in. But I feel like there's always someone, I feel like, in those cases who was in first, and then Ed and Lorraine would kind of come in and maybe take the spotlight a little bit, just because they were just this powerhouse, weren't they? It's this couple that really put, demonology, the paranormal, on the map.
Yeah. But Carl wasn't bitter about it. He actually worked with the Warrens for a while up until the point. But no, Carl's been in the paranormal game longer. I think both me and you have been alive. So hearing his perspective, all his cases that he's ever done, there should be movies made about him from the stuff he's done.
But I love that. Even just him being in the game so early on, like how things would have changed, even just the public perception of you, that's so interesting.
Yeah. But no, after talking to him, it was the reason why I got into demonology in the first place. That kind of pushed me forth into what I do now with my paranormal team, and kind of what separates my paranormal team, separates us from every other single paranormal team in the world. But like I told you off video or off recording, that's something I want to talk to you about afterwards. So, but everyone else who's listening to the podcast, or even listen to the Shadow Walker series, knows exactly what I'm talking about. So more bait for the hook for you there. But what are your future plans with the podcast?
I guess for me, just trying to post as regularly as possible. Like that's always a big one, just putting out. My thing is, I would rather sit on an episode for a while and really have it as a polished piece. I don't just, and I'm not saying that other people do this by any means, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I suppose. So I take time, and my whole thing's kind of just like quality over quantity. But I know people want more, so I'm always kind of leaving people with that, which not a bad position sort of be in. But yeah, just give people more. I guess I'm trying to find different ideas as well. Like once again, maybe getting back out and trying to do some more investigating on a podcast, things of that sort of nature. Also, just finding guests who maybe haven't been able to have a voice, and that's always an interesting and difficult kind of task to do, because you might be speaking to someone for quite a while, and then it sounds like they want to come on and share this, insane account that, I feel like a lot of people could get something from, or maybe benefit from, and then they don't want to do it, or they go cold. This is the thing. There's a lot of time spent in the background. Like the best part about doing the podcast is doing what we're doing right now, is like speaking into the mic, sharing your thoughts, your opinions, these stories, this evidence. But that is the tiniest fraction of doing a podcast. It's the best part, but it's also the shortest. The legwork for everything else is insane. And that's why, these really large, successful podcasts have teams, but as you guys know, it's just it's a lot of work, but it's work you want to do because you want to put out the best sort of product that you possibly can.
Yeah. I know all too well. I would love to keep putting episodes out on time, but our outside responsibilities, not work, what we do for our paranormal team, take priority over the podcast. And I'm not saying it's showing, but it does make it difficult to get episodes out on time. But we always make sure to get an episode out for people who are listening. So, because we know a lot of listeners are like interested in exactly what's going on and stuff like that. So I'm assuming the same with your listeners as well.
Yeah, if you go quiet for too long, people start to panic. I found during the bushfires over here, I think it was at the beginning of 2020, maybe the end of 2019. I hadn't posted because it was kind of over that Christmas period as well. I'd gone abroad on a holiday, and I guess people in the States started to see that like Australia was on fire, and people were like, "Are you okay? You haven't posted. Is everything fine?" I'm like, "I'm actually like in England currently. I'm not even anywhere near any of this." But that's the kind of that's the perception that people have. It's like if you don't post, sometimes it's like, are they even alive? And like, I love that people go to the effort to be like, I might just check in on Dylan. That always makes me go like, all right, I've got something coming for you. Don't worry, it's all good. But yeah, I always find that pretty funny.
Yeah. We have a few people like that will do that, but at least we try to post ahead of time and say, hey, we're taking a break for a week or so, or we give an excuse on why we've been not on, post an episode or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But where can everybody find you?
Anywhere where you get your podcast you currently listen to now, just Paranormal Thoughts Podcast. We've got quite an extensive back catalogue now, just because I think this is like the 6th year of doing the show. So it's pretty interesting, I say to people, because I started when I was, 20, and I'll be 27 this year. So like my entire 20s exist through Paranormal Thoughts, which is really bizarre, but it's kind of cool to have that. And then, however long it kind of continues on, it's just going to be like this snapshot of my life within the paranormal. It's so weird. But once again, like the whole selfish kind of thing of doing it because I get a lot out of it, and people hopefully have also gotten something just from it existing. But yeah, it's been such an amazing ride, and I know you guys would feel the same having done yours. I feel like there's nothing quite like the topics that we get to speak about, and just I think how important this stuff is to really get people across. Just because I don't know, there's a lot of unexplained out there, and I don't know, a lot of people experience things every day, and I think it's good for them to be able to come listen to people like yourselves and a bunch of other, I've seen, a bunch of other guests you've had on who I also know as well. And I think there's a lot of people doing some great work and important work.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
No, the pleasure is all mine. It's great to just meet other people in this industry. Honestly, I think it's so important that we all kind of reach out and just get to speak to one another.
Yeah. And for all my avid listeners, go check out Paranormal Thoughts Podcast and where you listen to the podcast, stuff like that. Funny enough, my podcast did episode. We did an episode about different podcasts to listen to. I think we're going to do a part 2 and probably include you on. Yeah,
love it
before the first hint. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on. And as always, we'll catch your Weirdos in the next one.
Monster song